All right, so welcome everyone to the Richmond Planning Commission meeting of January 3rd, 2024, our first meeting in 2024. Welcome to our members and to our new member, Ian Bender, just appointed last night, so fresh off the griddle, and our guests. So thank you all for coming. Ian, do you want to just introduce yourself and say
Sure.
like where you live or what you
Yeah,
do or something?
sure. I live on Dugway Road. I've been living in Richmond at this property since 2004. Raised a couple of kids, put them to the schools here. They're out of the house now, and I'm one of those people that needs to downsize but can't find a place in Richmond probably that I can move into. So, but not my main reason. I don't know. I'm kind of interested in development, conservation, tax bills, relations among neighbors, and preserving the American dream, so to speak. So it seemed like kind of a good place to land right now. And
Sounds great.
I've watched some of your meetings and really like the way you guys do stuff. Be happy to participate.
Excellent. Well, we'll throw you right into it.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
all right. So our first order of business is to review the agenda and to adjust it. We have two items on the agenda, both equally important. So we're going to try and divide the time in half. The first one is to discuss the master development plan language. This is a follow-up of our meeting on December 20th and December 6th, where we advanced a package of amendments to go into the select board's hearing process. And this is the next step. This was omitted from that package on purpose, but now we're beginning to deal with it. The second item is going to be the discussion of the creamery development. And I see Josie and Brendan are here. We're going to talk about increasing some density there and making some zoning changes. So both important discussions. Anybody want to adjust the agenda in any way? Okay, hearing no comments, we'll proceed with that agenda and move on to asking if there is anyone here who would like to make a comment about anything not on the agenda. We'll deal with comments as they come up with the agenda items. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. We'll go to number 4 on our agenda, which is a review of the minutes of our 12/20 meeting. Are there any alterations that anyone would like to make? Any corrections to those minutes, additions, changes? Hearing none, we will accept those minutes into the record as written. Hi, Allison. Welcome. Okay, so we're going to move right along to item number 5 on our agenda, which is to discuss the master development plan language in the subdivision regulations. So hopefully everyone had time to review the memo that I sent out. The first part of the memo was just some kind of conceptual things about planning and zoning that I wanted to get out there. I'm not going to review them. They're just to look at and, to remind everyone that those factors are important in what we do. And I want to move right to some goals, some discussion goals that I thought we could have for this meeting and beyond. We will undoubtedly need more than this meeting, but we can start here. I wanted to just briefly first go over where we have left ourselves in approving the packet of amendments that we approved, which removed the master development plan language from the PUD section and added the critical permits condition to the PUD section, but it did not deal with the subdivision regulations since we had not really, announced that we were going to do that. Where it leaves us is pretty much exactly the same place that we were before in terms of the master development plan language, because we have removed it from the PUD, but PUDs are still going to be reviewed by the subdivision through the subdivision regulations. So since this language is in the subdivision regulations, the master development plan language will still be in effect until we change it in the subdivision regulations. So both PUDs that are in fact subdivisions and PUDs that are not subdivisions. Am I making some kind of echo there? Anybody hearing that? No?
I feel sounding pretty good.
Okay. So the PUD applications that are actual subdivisions will be reviewed just like subdivisions, which include the master plan language at this time. PUDs that are not subdivisions, we have said we are not calling them subdivisions, but they will also be reviewed under the subdivision regulations. So right now, that's where we stand, just to make sure everybody knows that the changes that we have in fact made and are proposing to go to the select board are our main goals, which is, that we have changed the IC district to allow dwellings, to remove, PUDs can be either subdivisions or not. We have made sure that in the IC district, residential PUDs can only be placed on prior residential lots. So those changes all stand. It's just the master development language that we haven't really we're not with this packet actually proposing something that will change the way things are done. So that's why we are now going to take up a discussion of the master development plan language in the subdivision regulations. Any questions about that? Anybody want to say anything about that? It's probably all obvious to everyone.
Yeah, I do want to just reiterate what the changes are, and our approach was to the IC district specifically and adding dwelling units as a use. Also removing the subdivision requirement to that to allow for subdivisions. And as such, they still have to go through the master plan aspect of it or the subdivision aspect of it because we haven't cleaned that up yet. And the final point to make here is that we are focusing on basically 5 residential lots that exist right now. So that's I just wanted to add that as an addendum to what the chair is saying, and I shall be quiet at this point.
Right. So this goal fits in with our housing focus, which we're trying to use the housing lens with many of our changes because we know we do have this housing crisis. So this actually allows some additional housing without, of course, destroying the commercial potential of the IC district. That was our goal. So we are hoping that we see some additional housing in that northern part of the IC district. Okay, so then we want to talk a little bit about what people see as the problems with the master development plan language. What are the problems? And we have heard from our zoning administrator, Tyler Mesha, and the DRB as to what they feel the problems are with the language. And Tyler submitted quite a long letter that Keith and I are working on a response to, but I'll just go over the basic problems that he sees with this language. One is that he feels that the word appropriate, when it's used to say that the DRB is going to consider appropriate standards for the preservation of land, he feels that's too vague. So frankly, I agree with him. It is kind of vague. Appropriate, your appropriate might not be my appropriate. So what I would like to encourage us to do here is to consider putting in our zoning regulation some actual standards that relate to the preservation of natural resources. It is the fact that, you know, wetlands, you're not really allowed to do anything with wetlands. You're not allowed to do anything in the floodplain. You know, these things are mentioned here and there in the zoning document. But I would like to see us pursue developing some actual standards that could be referred to by the DRB or the zoning administrator, rather than using the word appropriate standards. That would not likely be in the subdivision regulations. That would be in our zoning regulation. And we could either do it just for the AR, which is where it mostly comes into play, because that's where the land is that needs to have protections, or we can have it as a standalone part of standards, which I believe is what Keith favors, is having it apply to the whole zoning document. Here are the standards that are going to be referred to. Some of them may end up being critical permit conditions. But anyway, we have something to help the DRB to know what needs to happen about open space. So that's the first, that was a point that he had that I agreed with. I didn't really agree with his conclusions, but I agreed that appropriate is a vague and non-specific word. The second point was this confusion about whether a non-subdivided PUD should have to go through the subdivision procedure of sketch plan, preliminary, and final plan. And we're still working on whether, you know, that's exactly the right procedure, or do we want that to be just a two-step procedure? I think that's a technical kind of fix that we don't need to spend too much time on. His third main point was that he and the DRB would like things to be as objective as possible so that there's a minimum amount of subjectivity. This is, you know, like a philosophical point. The DRB's job in a certain way is to assess unique situations, so they need some flexibility. So we would like to create something, we would like to make our subdivision regulations be as objective as possible, and putting in natural resource protection standards adds to that, but also to allow some flexibility in case there are unique situations. So that is something that I think we can work on developing, is what the right balance is between objective and subjective. So how much, you know, most PUD and subdivision regulations allow quite a bit of flexibility. Maybe our DRB would like to have less flexibility and more objectivity. So we need to work on making the right balance between those concepts. And then they wanted to have, they thought that the critical permit conditions was a step in the right direction, wanted to have more information about that put into the subdivision regulations. So those were the main concerns that were presented by Tyler and signed off on by the DRB. We also had some comments from our town attorney, who, they're not his final comments, but his preliminary comments. He was concerned, you know, neighbors have concerns about a master development plan should be binding so they know what the future will bring. Our attorney's concerns were that he didn't want to have the developer feel that the master development plan was binding in some way. In other words, if he proposed that 10 years from now he was going to do such and such, it's not permitted yet, it's a phased kind of project, he felt that if it was approved, that master development plan, it would give the developer a feeling that he had a right to those future uses. and maybe conditions would change and, you know, it wouldn't be suitable anymore to do that. So, you know, his concern was binding the town to the developer's plans. The neighbor's concerns are not binding the developer to future plans. Both of these things are problematic for many reasons. We don't know about the future. So anyway, that was the extent of the concerns. And then the neighbors, I will call Bradley and Jason the neighbors, had a concern that the master development plan should be more rigorously pursued and should be more binding. And then, you know, our response so far has been, well, let's have these standards that can be referred to, where there are actual standards, some of which will be critical permit conditions, some may be permanent easements, whatever it is, but we're going to have a set of, you know, agreed by the residents of this town protections for natural resources, which we don't really have in our zoning so far. So, all right, so I'll open it up to discussion on any of those points and see where you all want to go with it. We have been working along with Keith and I with making some, you know, a draft of revised subdivision regulations that, you know, if we can all come to some basic kind of opinion about some of these topics, we can have for our next meeting. And then we can talk about exactly how that would look. In our initial attempts, we've essentially said that, you know, they're going to have to refer to the standards, but that there may be a place for some kind of professionally prepared plan, like a master development plan, for a very special set of circumstances, like if it's a project where the town is going to be expected to take over a road, for instance, or to take over infrastructure like stormwater. In that case, it may be that even to come to a conclusion on the current application, you need to take into account what is going to happen in the future. But that's going to be a very special circumstance. You know, it's something that Act 250 sees,
Right.
and that will, any project that is big enough that is going to have that kind of an impact is going to be likely to go through the Act 250 Master Development Plan program. And that, you know, in the Act 250 application, the master plan, what it says under master plan is that you have to consult your district coordinator. So I do plan to do that. I plan to call the district coordinator and say, what kind of criteria would make you have to have a master development plan? That may, you know, have some import to our thinking.
Yeah, and I would add that that's a pretty important conversation that we need to have, because you have certain criteria that kick off the requirement to go to A250. And if we understand exactly what that is, we could tailor make our zoning to help with that. So just adding that we are very cognizant that we need to get that information.
And we hope to get it and to use it before they change it. Because Act 250 is, you know, always being thought about in the legislature. Is it too much? Is it too little? How does it, you know, is it holding back the development of housing? What is Act 250's role? So anyway, but in the next couple of weeks, we'll we can have that conversation with the Act 250 people, and it will help us to determine what is useful. What is useful here. And since we have Josie and Brendan here, I'll just mention that in the Buttermilk project, you know, because you can amend your master development plan at any point and there are no restrictions on amending it, the future is not certain, even with a master development plan. And the conditions may change, as Josie and Brendan have mentioned. The town conditions may change, you know, in 5 years or 10 years, when you want to do a later phase of your project, things may be completely different. So what exactly is the point of having a master development plan? Nobody can count on it being actually the way things are going to be. And maybe that's okay, because maybe we don't know how things are going to be. So just mentioning that, even though we're not on the Buttermilk topic, they have been operating under a master plan, and you know,
Conceptual.
it's conceptual. That's the problem. It's all conceptual. It exists in somebody's mind. It may not exist in somebody's mind. So that's that. Just as a side comment, in the material that we are submitting to the select board about the IC district residential uses, if the Donovans want to now make a lot, which they will be able to, once this is all approved, we assume the select board is going to approve it and it's going to be adopted. If that happens, in fact, they will not need to do a master plan because they will be making 2 lots, each of which is developed. There is no remaining land. I was thinking about this, Keith, because we talked about it earlier, but there's actually, if they make 1 lot, it's just their house is on 1 lot, which is a big lot. It has the other 9 acres on it, and they have proposed development for a 1 acre lot. So they will not need to make a master plan because there's no remaining land for which no development is either existing or proposed. So that's my interpretation of that situation. Anyway, it looks like, Bradley, your hand is up. It was sort of in the shadow there, but.
No worries. I wasn't sure when the appropriate time to share some public comments was. So if it's now, then great. If not, I'm happy to wait. So
Sure. No, this is good. Nobody else seems to be raising a hand right now. So.
okay, great. Yeah, I just want to share a few comments. I'll try to keep it brief. First want to clarify from some of our past conversations on this topic that my perspective here is well informed by my experience. I just want to be really clear that I'm not here to talk about any specific case. I think it's important that any changes to the master development plan language should not be made or not be made because of any particular case. So I just want to be really clear about that. I'm interested in seeing what draft language you come up with to replace the master development plan language, and I'll try to reserve comments until I see that language. So, but I'm interested in seeing what that looks like and what you're working on there. I do want to ask, something for commissioners to think about is what is the rush with making these changes to the master development plan language? Is this language in its current form, is this really a barrier to developing new housing? I'd like to understand that a little more. I think that's an important question that, is this practically speaking holding anything up? And I apologize if I'm repeating myself here, but I would also ask commissioners to consider your intent behind removing the master development plan language. I think this is important for you to think about. Do you agree with the underlying premise that developers should be forthcoming with their plans, yet you think the current language is unworkable? Or do you disagree with this underlying premise? And depending on which perspective you're coming at this from, I think you could end up at a very different result. So I think it's important to be clear in your minds about what you're setting out to do here. I also want to note that I haven't really heard, other than commissioners, I haven't heard anyone speak in favor of removing this master development plan language. coming into this meeting, my questions were, really who is asking for this language to be removed? Who specifically from the DRB? You mentioned the letter from Tyler. It seems that this letter is an important document in your deliberations. So I think it would be important that the public is also able to see this document and see what's in there. Is Tyler, in fact, speaking on behalf of the DRB? Did Tyler and the DRB work on this together? Is there a statement from the DRB on this topic? I think, kind of understanding who is saying what exactly would be valuable input to this process. Again, going back to that question of, is this really holding up anything, right? Is, what specifically, I understand conceptually what the challenges are with this, as far as the perspective that you brought forward, but I would say concretely and specifically, what has been ineffective and problematic about this language from the perspective of those folks who want it removed. And, like what I'd just like to, I think understanding that a little more would be good. But again, I'll try to reserve most of my comment until I actually see what draft language you come up with and save that conversation for that. But that's all I wanted to share for now, but thank you.
Okay. Yep. And just, a quick comment about the intent is that. So what were we talking about? Oh, I wanted to make a comment, I think, about the intent of removing the master development plan language, which when we decided to do this at our 12-6 meeting or our 12-20 meeting, our 12-6 meeting, I think, it was because this language appears to be useless. It's toothless. It doesn't provide the certainty that people think they're going to have, either developers or neighbors. They don't have a sense that, it's a false expectation of certainty. So this is not good language to have in a document. And the goal is to remove useless language and clean it up, basically. So that's the intent. That's the motivation there. And the idea is to try to figure out what will actually bring about what the master development plan language was intended to do, which it isn't doing. So, and those are the kinds of things that we're working to try to implement, is things that will actually do a better job at doing what the master development plan language was supposed to do, which is just not working for us. So, Mark.
Yeah, one thing I want to say is, I totally support where you're coming from, because I do agree that for all practical purposes, it is worthless language, but I'm afraid of a repeal and replace mentality where we would repeal what little language we have and then at some later date come up with a replacement. Whereas I would be far more interested in letting sleeping dogs lie and replacing at the same time with something that's more concrete. I get the DRB's opinion 100%. I understand where Taylor's coming from and anyone else who's trying to read it, but at least that's some bastion of indication of the zoning intent to understand the bigger picture and have some sort of moderation on applications. So I know it's a tough one, but I'm kind of leaning towards coming up with better language first.
So that's what we've done so far, and that is the goal here, Mark, is to come up with a better system with better language, put in standards that you have to refer to, because that's what it's all about. It's about open space. What are the standards that we have in this community about protecting open space? We need those standards. So the goal is to come up with the standards and to not say that, you're bound in the future to do this or that, but that whenever you come in, these are the standards that you have to. So you come in now for permit A, you have the standards. We might want to add more language about considering the cumulative impacts of things. For instance, when you come in for B, these are the standards. You still have to consider these standards, and you have to consider the cumulative impacts of A and B. Things like that. That is what we hope to do here. before we go to the subdivision regulations and remove the master development plan language.
That's perfect. That's wonderful news. I'm glad that was the game plan you laid out, because
Yeah.
I fully support that 100%. Thank you.
Yeah, and so that you as a commissioner will want to think about what it is that will achieve the goal that this is not achieving.
Mhm.
So, Brendan.
Mine was really brief, Virginia. I think that it's nearly impossible for you to write the perfect language, but you absolutely, I would hope, just know there's no way to read the crystal ball, and it has to be flexible because there's so many changes at hand, and they're happening faster and faster in our lives every year. I.e., like the whole meeting just got hacked somehow. It's just, there's no way to read it for us or me as a visionary or developer trying to do the right thing or be a steward of the land. And when you get locked into a myopic barrier and parameters, then it costs us all so much more time and money and going back and forth because of regulations that were put into place without having the flexibility to adapt and pivot and adjust. And that's all. I just think it keeps the further future process more malleable, quicker to execute, and in better interest of the town and the current environmental situational interest at hand.
Okay, great, thanks. Matt Dyer, is he okay to speak?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes. So I am not speaking for the DRB, but as a member of the DRB.
Okay, good. I'm glad to know.
So yeah. And maybe, and I'm sorry for joining late, and I apologize if this has been, drilled into the ground already, but I wanted to reiterate that this regulation is really hard for us every single time because of the ambiguity of the language. I totally appreciate and from both perspectives, both from abutting landowners having concerns about feeling protected, but also from the perspective of developers. We struggle with this every single time any sort of subdivision or anything comes before us, how to interpret this regulation. And internally we go back and forth, and I really appreciate that you guys are talking about it. My personal feeling is it feels like it's impossible it has no teeth, basically, even if we were to, force somebody to design an entire, phase 3 subdivision with every well location and home, and it wouldn't stand up in court if somebody decided that they wanted in 10 years to do something different. So to have that in there I understand what Mark was saying about a sense of it's something that's there, but it ends up causing us a lot of problems in dealing with these applications where we're dealing with this wording that doesn't make sense. And we all understand the intent of it, but because it's so ambiguous, depending on the application, it leaves us often with, our hands tied, trying to figure out if what somebody wrote is enough or if what somebody wrote isn't enough, and if we're going to get taken to e-court because we, did this or did that. I don't know. That's my rambling opinion about it. Again, my personal feeling is it's a hard thing to even uphold, even if we did, stick very strictly to the wording and force somebody to have a very detailed master plan. I don't know. It feels like if we're forcing somebody to decide what they're going to do with their property for the rest of their lives, that feels a little short-sighted. Because what if somebody then in 10 years, passed their property to their children, and their children had different plans, and because of something that was ruled on, 40 years ago, all of a sudden they can't do something. So anyway, that's my general opinion about it. But again, my main thing is, as a DRB member, it's been really hard to deal with as a regulation. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in. And, we do feel that planning and zoning should talk about these things, and that we should figure
Absolutely.
out what is going to work. What is going to be administratively possible for a small town with volunteer boards? What is going to work for allowing there to be some flexibility in the future, but standards that people can count on until the zoning is changed. Let's figure out what is actually going to be something that can be used and will at least provide some kind of, certainty, as much as we can appreciate about an uncertain future. So, Ian.
I just make a comment, not so much on the practicality of the language that you're trying to come up with, but it seems like all of the onus is being put on the developer in these situations to communicate what their plans are, which is, it's reasonable to expect to have their view of the future. But I think it's important that neighbors or people who are moving into this area start to take some responsibility for knowing what could be happening around them in the future. And that could be something that may not be the role of the planning commission or the DRB, but maybe the planning office, when people are buying property in this town, could take it upon themselves to educate people what they're getting into, more or less. If you buy a house with an open field next to you, there might very well be a housing development there in 10 years. It's not guaranteed, but it might happen. So that's all.
Yeah, well, and that is an educational process that, for instance, you can read the zoning document. We would like to make it very readable so that people actually go to it if they're moving into, let's say, the industrial commercial district where we've just allowed new residential uses. People who move in to new residences in that district need to know that this is an industrial commercial district, and there might be near them some commercial uses. What? Well, you have to read the zoning to see what could be there. And that may, make you decide that you don't want to live there because, there might be a wholesaler or a warehouse or something, so we would like to encourage people, and we hope our zoning and planning staff, when people come in, they say, look, you're moving into a residence in an industrial commercial area. There are a lot of things that are not allowed there, like you can't put an airport there and you can't put an oil well there. It's really a commercial district, but the people who move in there, the residential people, should know that they're moving into an area that could have commercial development. So, I kind of agree with Ian's point and think that we need to encourage people to figure out, so they don't have complaints later, what it is that's possible. And we don't know whether anything of those will come here or not, but according to our zoning, that is a possibility. So, Adam, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess Ian touched on a lot of the point I was wanted to make, but I guess I keep just coming back to the idea that we have pretty thorough zoning regulations that we are revamping at the moment, and we will continually revamp throughout the future. And so we do have a quote unquote master development plan for the whole town, which is the town plan, and our zoning regulations are written to accomplish the town plan. And so I guess having a master development plan seems redundant if all parts of that development are going to meet the underlying zoning regulations in the district. Obviously, if anything were to differ from that, that would be different. But I mean, ultimately, like the master development plan is the zoning regulations in the town plan. And so if anyone is concerned about what might be happening in a neighbor's property or any property, I mean, the end all be all would be to read the zoning regulations and know that anything that's outside your own property line could be developed to the maximum amounts that are in those zoning regulations. I guess that's why I just keep coming back to the fact that we should have strong zoning regulations that apply to all districts, independent of it being a PUD or a subdivision or whatever. And if those regulations are applied consistently and evenly, I guess I don't see the point of a master development plan. But I guess Matt can speak more clearly to that. I think the critical permit conditions cover the gap between what's written in regulation and how a PUD could allow some deviation from that, as long as the overall holistic development met those regulations. So I feel like we're covered, and I really want to come back to the point. I think this master development plan language really is a false sense of security for anyone. I mean, it's a guess of what the future holds, and none of us really know.
Okay, yeah, and I would like at some point to hear how you feel, and when we have developed some additional natural resource protection standards, that is going to add a little bit more to the feeling that our zoning is supporting our town plan, and that here are the standards. One of the other problems with our zoning document that we can't deal with all right at this moment is that the procedures are all mixed up with the standards. We need to have a set of standards that all things are measured against, and over time we'll get there, and we're just doing it bit by bit now, is to try to get some things that are actual standards, that instead of saying the DRB should consider the landscape, we're going to say something about the landscape, and of course we won't cover every situation. That would be impossible, and this is why we have a DRB, is to give some flexibility, but at least they will have more help in determining what is important. Gary. Go ahead, Adam, if you have.
I just want to say, I think that the natural resource protections are going to be a critical part of making this, omitting the master development plan language actually be a positive step. We'll be having those natural resource protections and standards in place. So I look forward to helping develop those.
Great. Yeah. And, it's going to be super important for other reasons besides this whole question, that we have strong natural resource standards. When we come to talking about the AR, this is going to be a huge conversation. Is forests, how can we preserve them? Natural habitats, how can we preserve them? How can we balance people's individual property rights with preserving these resources from the future? It's going to be a huge question. It doesn't belong in a procedure. It belongs in the standards. Gary.
Hey, so I also think the master plan doesn't, to me, it's like a guess at what you want to do now, but plans change both from the landowner side, but zoning changes, state law, like the law that passed last year. What if you had a master plan based on old zoning, and then the town wants it more dense, or the state law forces, allows landowners to force the town to have more density than maybe they wanted. I just don't see where it means anything. You can't have a master plan that can't be amended. So it's just a guess. I mean, it seems to me that if we're trying to get more housing in town, it's just, I don't know. I feel like the planning commission starts on rezoning under the state law, and then we head off we keep getting diverted off that. I think there's a lot of opportunities in the village to increase housing in the village. But we keep diverting, instead of finishing up the village zoning. Now we're headed off into master plans, or we just keep going off on these sidelines, and not finishing up the village zoning.
Mm. Point taken.
You're
Yep.
here.
Katie,
Yep, trying to unmute here. And put my face up. I guess I have two. One point is that when I was on the select board and we rezoned Jolena Court for its existing zoning, we attempted to put in environmental protection language that at the time we thought the DRB could actually use to make decisions. And what we found out after the fact, after writing the zoning, is that we were wrong and that they actually did not have regulatory power to use that language. And so I think that you're right, Virginia, that we have to come up with standards that the DRB can actually use, because otherwise it's just a pretty please that developers pay attention to environmental concerns. So I think we definitely need to have rigorous standards. And then my other question is, have we looked at what other towns are doing to try to get a template or to just get some ideas of how other people are handling this issue, because we can't be the only ones. And that's my comment.
yeah. Well, I can tell you that some of the towns have equally vague and non-specific and, the same problem with the master plan that we have. So I haven't found one that I've liked so far. But anyway, Keith.
I just want to be cognizant of time. I want to give equal time to Buttermilk, if
Yes.
at all possible, because they kind of got shortchanged last time. So
Okay,
that's
5 minutes. We'll go for 5 minutes and then we'll move on to Buttermilk. Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one more comment about general DRB stuff. Like, I really appreciate what people have been saying, and I have to reiterate as much as possible that the more guidance and the more clear things are for us, it just, you might think we like interpreting regulations, but we hate it. I mean, we would much rather have it be very clear and, have there be no guesswork about what people are coming in to do. So I, generally speaking, I really like the direction that I'm hearing this going. So that's my 2 cents on that as a general thing, not just about the master plan thing, but generally speaking, that's something that historically we've struggled with. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I would add, Matt, that there ain't no way that it's going to be crystal clear. That's for sure. And I know
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
But I guess what I mean is, as long as, with the opportunity of me sitting here being able to say it, I feel like I can't not say,
Nope.
Every opportunity that there is to close down interpretation, in my mind, is a good thing.
Yeah.
So
I would agree.
Yeah, so we're trying to walk that line, to balance flexibility with certainty. So something we'll work on over time. All right, anybody else? We have time for maybe one more comment before our 5 minutes is up. And Bradley.
Just a quick comment. I'll do a little more research on this for the next meeting, but I was curious, since you had brought up Act 250 as a reference point, is that I'll dig into this a little more, because my searching was very quick, so I don't know if what I found is correct, but it does seem that in instances where there's a clear plan to build out a larger project in phases over time, and/or the applicant has proposed for review the construction of major infrastructure, which is for the obvious purpose of serving a larger development, then in those cases, the board does request additional information and can consider an application to be incomplete, right? So again, I'll do a little more digging on this before the next meeting, but it does seem that there are situations where Act 250 does take into account this concept of master development plan, right? And what they outline is exactly the sorts of situations that I'm concerned with, right? Not this idea of certainty, or that we have to have everything known about what's going to happen, but this idea where there are clearly phases intended, and there are clear indications of that, right? So that again, I'll look into it a little more, and that'll be a good thing to talk about at a future conversation on this topic. So, but that's all I wanted to add for now.
Yep. It does say it's for their larger plans. So since they only start looking at things that are 9 lots, then a larger plan is going to be probably larger than most of the plans that we have. Anyway, Ian.
Sure. But if I can say my point is that if you're looking to model policy that you create at the town level off of what Act 250 does, you could take a similar approach. That's all my point is.
Yeah, I don't think that's what we want to do. I think we would lean on Act 250 to handle those larger projects because they have a much deeper resource and expertise to handle those projects.
That's the purpose of Act 252. So that's the purpose.
Yeah, so we're not really wanting to model ourselves on Act 250, but we would like to know what it is they say so that people would know if they go to Act 250 for their larger projects. They don't actually require it for all projects. So anyway, all right. So Ian, I guess you're getting the last word in this conversation.
Real quick, I'm on the Act 250 aspect. I think what they're working on in the State House is any project less than 25 units will not trigger Act 250. I believe so.
Okay. Well, we'll see that when it comes down the pike.
Okay.
All right. So thank you all. And, just you can be thinking about these things, the standards and what have you, and we will return to it at some point. And meanwhile, we will continue as is in terms of the master plan language. But meanwhile, the other will go to the select board, the other parts of this package. So, all right. Moving on to our next topic, 6. Discuss buttermilk, request for zoning changes, including increased residential density. And, I did put down some thoughts on that in the memo. And I'm hoping that we can come to some agreement on certain things. So what they have given us is a kind of a short-term proposal and a longer-term proposal. The longer-term proposal is looking a lot like a master plan. So we may want to focus on the short-term proposal. So I would like to hear how the commissioners are feeling about that. The short-term proposal is for building number 2, for which they have a permit, is to put an additional 24 units on the same footprint by making the many or some of the units smaller and by using some of the commercial space for residential, by reducing the parking, which Act 47 is requiring anyway. How do people feel about saying that what we're going to consider is the short-term proposal and not worry about the longer term, which is going to have to take care of itself? And, unfortunately for them, if they come back in 5 years, they may have to change the zoning again, which is longer than just amending your permit. So here they are, they're patiently waiting for us to think about this question. So I would like to hear from commissioners how you are feeling about the short-term addition of these units combined in some form with these other aspects.
I can kick off. I just had a quick comment. I guess in light of our previous conversation, I think it's wise to consider the actual proposal that Buttermilk's putting in front of us. Obviously, they have given us the courtesy of giving us something resembling a master development plan. That's greatly appreciated, considering that that's what we're arguing about. So I think I would be on board considering what they're specifically proposing now. But it would be disingenuous to say that the long-term plan they presented wouldn't be on my mind while we're doing that. Those are my thoughts initially.
Yep. And it may be that in their particular case, they're going to be held to a master development plan because this whole project went in under a master development plan scheme. So it's unclear exactly, from the DRB's point of view, how much master planning they have to do. From our point of view, in terms of changing the zoning, it that is not exactly what we're concerned with, because we could opt to make their zoning such that they only had a small number of additional units, as opposed to saying we're going to, have this master plan with all of these units, which may or may not happen. And, in 10 years, people may not want to do that, or they may not want to do that, or, maybe housing is even worse, or maybe housing is better. So, any other commissioners want to weigh in on this? Are you okay, Allison? Yeah, go ahead.
Off the mute. I'm going to sound like a broken record and just say that I am concerned about the traffic in town. We and the nothing against these people or what they want to do, but I just think we have to be mindful of not loading up too many residences or too many cars that are going to have to wait. And the traffic can get pretty busy even as it is these days. And I'm also concerned. I did bring up the issue of the flood before, and I guess they didn't have any trouble with the recent flooding. I believe that was correct. But I just think that we have a problem in the lay of our land in the whole town, and that we really, I don't think we know yet the extent of some of the damage of the existing buildings and that have wet cellars that have yet to discover problems. I'm just concerned about the fact that we're just that Richmond is like a floodplain and hills. And so I think we should keep in mind the level of traffic. That's all I'm going to say, because I know we need more housing and there are some competing needs here. That's maybe not any help at all, but it's just on my mind.
Yeah, and one comment I have about that is that the people who live at the creamery are going to walk to the grocery store. If we add another 24 units down the street, those people are all going to drive to the grocery store. So it is useful to think about foot traffic versus car traffic. And, the longer term plan in terms of climate change is to have people driving less. You need people to live where they're going to find the services. So I think when we talk about traffic, we should talk both about pedestrian traffic and car traffic. And,
I agree with that too, Virginia. I don't have a problem with that. I agree with that. I would just like it to be, I just would like traffic to be a major concern that we consider. That's all.
Yep. And mitigating factors are something that we can certainly talk about. Mark.
Hey there. Thanks for soliciting opinions. I think last meeting there was a lot of neighbors who tuned in. It's unfortunate not seeing them here tonight, because I'd really like to hear what they think about. And I guess there's some things I kind of want to put in perspective. I was on the planning commission before this property was sold or any issues on development, where it was a talk about, trying to fix up that brownfield, and kids would go in and play, and there was potential safety issues, whatever. But I mean, when this first started out, it was like, first of all, it was going to be commercial was the goal. And then we're like, okay, well, that's just not practical. It's, talk was like 30 units, and then there would be bonus density for different perks, renewable energy, low-income housing, those kinds of things. We're like, well, maybe we can do that and go increase the density over 30. And that's where I think we ended up with saying, well, they They do put in solar. I think that's a great feature. We were looking at getting somewhere close to 45 anyways. Let's just make it 45 without any hooks. Let them do their thing with the solar anyways, which they're gonna, even though nothing was written into any of the zoning as far as those types of density bonuses specifically. But I think overall, the people on the commission, the people on the ad hoc committee, which consisted of like, at one point, like 15 different people were on this ad hoc committee, considering the Jelena Court rezoning and development program. And so it sort of settled out at 45 with a decent amount of, not nearly as much as I think a healthy contingent of the community wanted in commercial compared to it all being 100% commercial at the time. So it went up to 45, first floor commercial, and then 2 stories above that of housing. And we get up to 45. And then it sort of sat there, and there's no doubt that we've had some short-term setbacks with commercial development, and COVID changed a lot of things, and I don't know if that's going to bounce back or not. We don't know at this point, I guess is where we have to leave that. It's not a given thing that there's never going to be any commercial development in Richmond ever, and therefore we should just switch over everything to residential. I personally am not buying it, but we're biding our time, we're moving slowly. Why I'm so grateful that we were able to come to a compromise and agreement on the industrial commercial and zoning changes that we put in place that still protected at least the potential for commercial development. And so that's where we're at, plugging along. They go and they put up that building, which honestly I think was a surprise to everybody, as big as it is, as overwhelming as it is. Right on top of the cemetery. Not really looking like the building that was presented as this is what it was going to look like, with the different facades and all of that type of stuff. But okay, so it's in there, it's done. We're not going to make them tear it down or, pull out 2 extra units, which they weren't supposed to put in, but they put 14 units in instead of 12. I think was the number. And that was all done without any knowledge by the town until it was pretty much too late, and then boom, there it was. And we were stuck with 14 units unless we wanted to make them remodel the whole upstairs, which wasn't practical and defeated the purpose, because we got 45 unit zoning on the property anyway. So 2 more now versus 2 more later, big deal. And so, okay, so we're looking at another, 31 units to get up to the 45 that we agreed on. And we expected that to start moving along. And now, concerned about housing, the community, in the state, everybody wants to bring more people in and provide more housing for the folks that are already here, and the kids 100% agree with that. And so now, instead of getting 31 extra units in Jelena Court, we're now told that we can't afford to have hardly any commercial whatsoever. But then also, instead of adding 31 more units, they want to add, 55 more units, which isn't a small step up. That's 50% more than what the community sort of came to terms with the interim zoning and the 45 unit on the parcel. And now we're told that it's absolutely impossible for them to do anything to bring in any type of housing unless we give them an additional 24 units on the one building and pretty much remove, sounds like pretty much most, if not all of the commercial, most anyways. And it just seems like that's it. I feel like I'm being blackmailed. I feel like that's my choice is I either have to get any kind of housing, affordable housing, which the debate over affordable housing is a whole nother topic that we can get into. Yes, it isn't as expensive as buying the 800,000 McMansions that they're putting up in the woods. But it's still, you know, I wouldn't say it's certainly not affordable. Is it less expensive than the average unit? Probably. I'm not going. I don't know enough about it to make those kinds of debates. But I guess really where I'm going at that is we agreed to 45. 45 was a good number. 45, the community came to consensus on. Now we're told that's a financial impossibility, and we have to give them another 50% more density housing without even knowing what it's going to do with the 45 units that we're going in for, which I'm, you know, still really concerned about. I mean, there isn't another side street on Bridge Street that has 45 units on it. And here we're just going to put this one in instantaneously. Boom, there's another 45 units of traffic. And yes, I get the whole walking and density, and condensed density has less of an impact than spread out. You know, those same 45 units spread out over the AR district could have less of an environmental impact. But it doesn't change the fact that it's still 45 or 70 units going right in a really tight corner. I mean, that intersection is a pain in the butt. Coming across those train tracks is a pain in the butt. Traffic backing up to the light, perfectly feasible. Traffic backing up to the bridge in the morning, perfectly feasible. And now we're going to have 70 units dumping traffic in there, which is 2, 3, 4 times bigger than any of the other side streets on Bridge Street. I can see maybe arguing that right now the economy isn't practical to enable an entire floor of commercial, along with the additional 30 plus units up above. I'm willing to not fight that battle and come back with something, but to then also say, well, you now also have to give us an additional 24 units and increase the overall density 50% more than what the community had settled on seems too much. I wonder if there isn't some way we can't keep it at the 45, see what that does to the community and to the intersection and to the traffic. And then, you know, there's still a whole nother building lot that could go in there, a good size one that they're not going to be dedicating to anything now. Obviously they've got the reduced parking, which, you know, is unfortunate for the rest of the town, but you know, it's sort of mandated through the new state law, so we can't really mandate more than that, although I was hoping that would be some sort of benefit to the downtown overall, just because of this parking difficulty. And I don't know anybody who can tell me that there isn't a parking problem in Richmond. I don't know if I buy that. But so that's where I'm at. I'm like, how far do we have to go? Let's downsize the square footage of the building they're doing, allow them to put in their 31 units with a decreased ratio of commercial development, and then maybe going forward in another 5 years when they're ready for phase 3, 5, 10 years down the road, we can reassess. All right, well, 45 units wasn't a big deal. People are moving in and out. Nobody's driving out of those parking places. They all work locally at the Hatchet. So there is no traffic impact. But to just go from 12 to 70 without any recourse for the town to deal with that any better and manage it any better, it seems like a mistake to me. So I personally am cautioning against full ramp it, give them everything they could possibly want, and dialing it back and finding some sort of middle ground to where we were before, trying to get some housing in there sooner rather than later. And also very much looking forward to hearing more from the community and some public outreach we can do to get them interested members of the community here and listening to the tale that's being told. So that's my 2 cents for now.
All right.
For letting me
And
share.
is there any other information, Mark, that you are looking for to think about this besides community? So I did hear that community interest, how the community feels is something that you'd be interested in having more information. Any other thing? I mean, do you want to know how the building 1 has affected things in terms of parking or traffic? Do you want to know, are there other things that would help you to think about this?
No, I don't think so. I would like to see a real traffic study done, but I don't think that'll ever happen. A real one, from an independent party assessing what that impact would be. That would be the biggest thing I would like to see, even at 45, let alone going to 70, is to have an independent town purchased traffic assessment and realistic, honest explanation of what that's going to do to the people's commutes, general traffic, overall parking. Now that we're going to be reducing that, I know there's only 1 parking spot per unit, but pretty sure there's some of those places are going to have more than one person, more than one car. Now they sort that out. Right now there's still lots of extra parking.
Yes.
Over there, just on the dirt. So that's not really an issue. But at some point, there's going to be an overflow of vehicles, and I don't know where you're going to go. I thought, a great big property like that right downtown, maybe the rest of the community could benefit from having a little extra parking, but I don't think that's in the interests of the developers. So
well, they're not required to provide.
Exactly. You're not required, you're not going to do it, right? You're not going to do it for the benefit of anyone unless it's back in your bottom dollar. And certainly understand that. But that's my point too, is that their interest is not in the overall well-being of the community. It's in making the biggest bang they can for their buck with their buck. And that's just business. It'd be the same thing if someone was selling shoes on the corner. But we just have to realize that this isn't an altruistic effort that they're doing. They're just trying to make as much as they can with the materials they have. And that's capitalism.
Providing housing, we do have a housing need.
We do have a housing process. Yes, that's true. They could be growing food for hungry kids too. So, there's lots of ways that businesses can help out society, add to society. Adding housing certainly is a thing, but all of it right there at that specific location next to those train tracks with no other alternative means of transportation for anybody south of the bridge to have to wrestle with. I don't know.
Okay. Great. So let's see, Josie.
I just wanted to ask and clarify how there were several things that Mark just shared that was misrepresentations of actual history and have been shared often. And I wanted Virginia and or Keith to give me a clarity on how, because just providing, a lot of them are actually provided in the enormous amount of supplemental information that we've given over the last couple of meetings. But I just wanted to understand how best to address those, because there's several that it bothers me that we allow for this misunderstanding, misrepresentation of the history and facts to be continuously shared. And I've seen them in other meetings that I have not been able to be at. So I wanted to ask Virginia, Keith, how would you like us to, because that will take up the rest of the meeting.
Well, yes, I would like to give you an opportunity to do that. Would anybody else or any other commissioners eager to talk right now? Katie, we'll give you a chance in a minute, but go ahead. Ian, what do you want to say before we let Josie talk about what she's heard?
I was just going to say to Mark, thanks for the perspective and how you remember things went. I participated in some of those meetings, and it's kind of a foggy memory to me. So I remember certain things, but I wouldn't necessarily say how I remember them as factual. I also, I think it's important to note that two things can be true at the same time. I think that Buttermilk certainly is probably interested in making money. That's, part of being in business. But I also think they strike me as people that do care about the community and like to do things a certain way. And I think we should keep that in mind. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Katie, do you have a short comment, would you say, or a long comment?
I have a medium comment. It is a prepared comment that I had prepared for last week, and it would take me about 5 minutes to read.
Okay, well, let me give Josie time to respond to Mark, and then we will take your comment. There will be plenty of time for it. So,
thank you,
Josie, like 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, I'm going to try to keep it shorter because I'm just going to reference past supplemental information.
Yeah.
So Mark shared several different things, and I've heard them repeated in other planning commissions and other meetings. And I want to make sure, and Keith gets the brunt of these. I hear the recordings or I see the notes and minutes, and I jump on it because I believe that facts actually matter. Sadly, perception is often what is conveyed, and that's a shame because for me, fact is a fact. A few, I'm not going to address all of them because honestly, there are, if you go through the timeline and some of the historical documents, that is what is actually in there. So for one of the things that Mark addressed was the design concept. The design concept that was shared in 2015 and in 2016, where we got approval of, it was 2015, FYI, was before we even owned the property. It was still a brownfield, but we had to go through major hoops to get a grant. And we got approval of the design concept. That design concept in both words and look is exactly what the building is today. And at that stage, the interim zoning actually had no design concept approval required. We presented that information, volunteered it as part of the process. There was no comments. You could go through back in the notes. There was no concern. There was no discussion. There was no feedback. And then soon after it was built in 2018, the town got, I think it was Suzanne, one of the town administrators, got complaints that it didn't look back. And the town administrators actually defended that because they said, this is exactly what was presented, but that continues to be something that was shared. There was a second thing that he brought up, which was the number of units. And I think it's very relevant to talk about this. So we were approved for 45 units. That approval was approved. We refused to take on this project in 2015 when it was a brownfield because we couldn't afford it. No one could afford it based on what the parameters were at that point. And we got the approval of 45 units in 2015. That was 8 years ago. And over that period of time, we went about cleaning up the brownfield. And in 2018, after several, and again, this is in the documentation that was presented in terms of the history of the zoning and history of the site overall, we had been out there marketing big commercial spaces and we were struggling to find that. We lost several big anchor tenants. We had to relook at the commercials or we would not have gotten financing on the building. So we used the 45 units, which was our requirement to actually cut up the existing footprint to make it more economical. The funny thing is those units are some of the units that the community right now is the most excited about. Those are the affordable units. Those are the ones that are actually enabling workforce housing. So we took our valuable 45 and put 14 into the same footprint. That is traditionally allowable. The state, it was a rubber stamp state approval. We went through multiple discussions about that. So it was nothing that was anything but trying to go forward and provide a mix of housing. As you saw from the recent submission about who's there, we've achieved its workforce housing. There's other thing in terms of the commercial versus residential reality. The reality is for 8 years or longer, we've been hoping a different reality would actually exist. But the commercial real estate, there is no market, and if we want to progress forward with anything, we need housing to provide the workforce for that. So there's other things in there that he'd said that I would love to debate, but I think a lot of, especially like around the traffic, I don't really understand the comment about the third party. It is a third party that we used that actually came reference from A&R. That's how we got to our third party. When we did the traffic study for the brownfield in 2016, we used the same group to update it, and they looked at both the impact of our existing building and looked into the forecast, and they did not see that it was going to actually bump to the threshold that currently is in the zoning. So the idea that there's a third party, and you said, Mark used the word honest, and that is a trigger for me. Because there is no disingenuousness. We absolutely submitted all the accurate details. They're engineers, they're licensed, they have to be accurate. So I don't really.
It was pretty weak.
I'm sorry?
I remember reading the traffic study that they submitted and it was pretty weak. And you may have a point about not hitting the threshold of our current zoning regulations for requiring a traffic study, but this is like the tightest constricted traffic area in the town. It is on Bridge Street, right near those railroad tracks and the light. And maybe it doesn't warrant a traffic study out on Route 2. Or maybe it doesn't warrant it out on Hillview Road in Richmond, but it's a different story with where that is there. So that's why I wanted a traffic study. The one that was submitted originally was not a very comprehensive or
So Mark, you've said this several times. Can you give me, have you gotten a third party to validate that it was not comprehensive or honest? Do you have information on
I
that?
didn't say it wasn't, excuse me, Josie, and
You did use the word
I
honest.
apologize. Well, there is some connotation there that from things that I've heard, but.
So can you give me an example? And can you give me, I mean, we had to update it for the DRB. So I'd really like the information that you were using so that we could all work from the same information. We shared what we have. So could you please share what you understand why it was disingenuous?
I think we all understand that there are legal arguments on both sides, and you can go into court with the same facts and you can have one perspective, and then you can have an equally opposite perspective, depending on who's interested in what and who's paying for what.
So I'd like to just kind of interrupt this.
That's where my point is that I would like an independent traffic study.
So
great, you guys can pay for it.
The traffic study,
that's what it takes.
The traffic study that you cite, Josie, that was done in 2023 by Wall Consulting, right? Yeah, so that's in all the information. So we do need to, read all the information. There was a traffic study. It was done in 2023, and presumably they looked at the results from the existing building as well as the other building. So that's an updated traffic study. That's what we want to focus on.
I was referring to the one from 2016. I apologize.
Yeah. So we have a new traffic study, 2023, Wall Consulting. You can look up their specs if you want, but, and that presumably updates with the new information, which is what we're interested in from the building that already exists, and takes into account the new prospective building. So, I'd like to stick with that in terms of the traffic study. And also in terms of our regulations, we have regulations that have a threshold. We need to either change our regulations if we don't like those regulations, but those are the regulations that are existent. And so that's what people have to abide by. We can't say, well, I think those regulations are wrong and there's going to be too much traffic anyway. We are committed to having a set of written regulations that apply to everyone. If we say in our zoning, if it's below this standard, you don't need a traffic study, or you do need a traffic study, that's what we have to go by. We can't just be making things up. So I just want to make that point, that that's what we've got in the regulations. If we don't like that, we need to change that in our regulations.
Well, we're also being asked to change our regulations.
Yes, we are.
Something. So I think it allows us to look at a bigger picture of beyond what our current regulations say, because we're actually changing regulations considerably for this property, as density wise, and so I agree that we should look at what those thresholds are overall. But if ever there were a threshold limit to be lower, it would be at this intersection.
Okay, so I'm going to try to hear from someone else. Josie, do you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, I think the only other thing was to talk about, and again, this is what some of the information that has been provided, that it just would be helpful to other people who are on this call or listen to the recording, is that there is the history of why we're here and why we're talking about a change from 45 units up to an increase in units is about the delivering on what the community asked for, both in the town plan and what the community asked for in the housing study, right? And just as a reminder, when our interim zoning was ratified in 2020, we identified that we were most likely, and we were in the throes of the pandemic, we said we were most likely unable to move forward. In September of that year, I wrote a letter to support the housing study to say we cannot move forward with the current regulations with additional housing because of the constraints. This is not new news. So it might feel like new news, but we've been in a housing crisis. And so we're here to try to address that in a meaningful way and to progress forward. And and I want to go back, and I'm not sure Adam, or if he's still here, and I think it was Adam, not Adam, sorry. I don't know, it's the other new Ian, sorry. I appreciate your comments. I only do this for certainly not profit. And it is because then this would have been the stupidest decision of my entire life for 8 years. Let's just be very clear. And we are committed to what we put forward of mixed use, responsible, environmental. We had done solar panels before you guys started talking about it, right? So that is not because you guys asked us to do it. We are offering affordable workforce housing, not because you guys asked us for it, because it's the right thing for Vermont. And we're just being asked to be supported in enabling us to do more together. And we've told you this is what we need to do if you want to offer both workforce and affordable housing. And this is our recommendation on how best to move forward. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Adam.
Oh, I'm already muted. Yeah, I guess I had just a quick technical question. I know you had said that there was a new traffic study completed. I was just looking through the Buttermilk file that we had that was online, and I couldn't find that traffic study. So is there any way we can just get that updated one at some point so that we can all be on the same page with that?
Yeah, I think
certainly.
It might be in there too. I might be missing it. It's not. there was a lot of files, and I tried to scan through everyone quick and couldn't find it.
Yeah, it should be in there, but I can send that separately. It's public record, and that can be sent to all the members of the board if they wish to have that.
Perfect. Yeah, can you just send that? I mean, just send that to all of us, just so we can make sure we're talking about the same thing going forward. Thank you, Keith.
I shall write a note to myself.
Because that must have gone to the DRB,
of course,
I imagine, for the permitting. Okay, so I'm going to give Katie a chance now to talk.
Thanks, Virginia. This will sound like I'm reading because I'm reading.
Okay, sounds good.
So hello, I'm Katie Mather. I'm a resident of Richmond. I live in the Village, and I served on the select board for 2 years. During that time, I was involved in, among other things, approving the existing zoning of Jolena Court. I prepared something for last meeting to respond to the request for 125 units, but based on the presentation from last week and the conversation that we're having now, it doesn't sound like that's the ask anymore. I do want to clarify one thing from that ask. The impression that I got from that presentation was that Buttermilk has never considered asking for a number that high and only arrived at it after the town asked about truly affordable housing. But in fact, in 2019, Buttermilk asked for 30 units per acre on all developable acres, or on all acres, not just developable, which would have been 180 units. So I just want to put that out there. And while Virginia's recent Planning Commission newsletter stated that the town is in need of a modest amount of affordable housing, that's not what this project is. This is all market rate rental units. Based on what Virginia said at the end of last meeting, it seems like the question at hand is, how many market rate units do we want in Jolena Court? I'll be glad to have more housing there, but we need to be careful we don't create more problems by trying to solve the housing issue. I had 4 main issues I thought we needed to keep in mind when the ask was 125 units, and I think those are still relevant. They are traffic, flooding, environmental impact, and the town's character. A few weekends ago, I walked from the river to the light, from the bridge to the light, and counted the number of residential units in that area. A generous estimate, I will call it an estimate because it was difficult to tell how many units were in a few buildings, but a generous estimate in the downtown area is still fewer than 100 residents. If anyone is attempting to drive that corridor in the morning or increasingly in the afternoon and evening, you'll know that we need to be careful about the density added to Jolena Court. It will have an effect on traffic. In an email to our former town planner, Josie Keitel of Buttermilk acknowledged that fact. She wrote, To maximize the density of this downtown property, at some point we need to have a constructive discussion about the road infrastructure. We believe the one-way through road would be best. I'm happy to provide a link to that email and other documents I reference here. The through road referenced is a paved road that would connect Jolena Court to the middle of town center, the place we're about to vote to bond for a multi-million-dollar renovation that does not include a through road. Furthermore, creating an ingress or egress to Jolena Court there would mean paving next to or altering the floodway back there that is more and more frequently the only thing between town center and the river. As we saw all over the state in July and again a few weeks ago, cutting into our floodways has a massive impact on our towns. I, for one, do not want to gamble with our downtown by adding so many units to that area that we either have a catastrophic traffic jam where Jolena Court currently meets Bridge Street, or we're forced to consider an ill-advised paved road in a place where a road does not belong. Phase 2 of Buttermilk's project, which has been permitted by the DRB, already allows them to tear out a large swath of the forest behind town center, which will likely lead to even greater and faster runoff into the floodway and downstream. It's an area that Eric Sorensen from VT Fish and Wildlife said provides important wildlife habitat, and he also said that the standard 50-foot buffer associated with Class 2 wetlands is likely inadequate to protect the wildlife habitat functions of this wetland. When I was on the select board, and I referenced this earlier tonight, we added environmental protection language to the last round of zoning, hoping to use it as a model for the rest of the town that we were originally told would allow the DRB to make permitting decisions based on environmental impacts. However, after we passed the zoning, we learned that the language didn't actually provide regulatory power to the DRB. Yes, we need housing, but we also need to protect a rare wildlife resource in the middle of downtown. In addition to considering traffic, flooding, and environmental impact, the town also needs to think about the appropriate amount of market rate units for that area. An extra 55 units, a total of 69, is over a 50% increase in the number of units downtown. We have to consider how that will affect the character of our small town. In Josie's presentation last week, she made it clear that when the parcel was zoned for 15 units, Brendan was not interested because the project wasn't viable. It became viable when we changed the zoning to 45 units. It's currently at 45 units. In that same conversation, Buttermilk claimed that the current barrier to financing is the first floor commercial requirement, already a change from the 50-50 requirement in place when they bought the property, which has then changed several other times at their request. Based on what we've heard from Buttermilk, if the town waives the commercial requirement, which I am open to, 45 units should still be viable. It's clear they want more than 45 units. They want 69. Do we? The job of the Planning Commission and the Select Board is to make decisions that serve the interests of the town, not the interests of a real estate developer who doesn't live here, who doesn't struggle with our traffic, and who isn't consistently checking a spreadsheet to see which of our neighbors has flooded or washed out this time. As a town, we are not obligated to make a real estate developer's numbers work. We have changed our zoning over and over again to meet their needs. We've also changed their permitting after they didn't build to the zoning. We need to make sure we don't trade the health and livability of our town for a developer's profits. And that is all. And thank you to the Planning Commission for all the work that you are doing.
Okay, anyone else would like to make a comment? I would like to ask you, Katie, how you conceive of an additional 24 units altering the character of the town. In what way exactly?
Well,
it would be nice to get beyond these kind of generalized feelings of fear that people have. I mean, can we get beyond them? In what way is this going to change it? There's going to be more foot traffic. Is that a bad thing? Is there, you know, our businesses, our restaurants are going to be more supported, our grocery store, our hardware store, there will be more people using those. So we have a downtown where we have a density of 24 units per acre. So in what way exactly? Can you put it into words how the character of the town is going to change?
Well, I guess like I said, when I walked from the bridge to Main Street, I counted fewer than 100 total residences in that area. And I'm not sure how many of them are rental units. But I guess one of the things that I can say would change is just potentially change. I'm not saying, I mean, I've been a renter and I've been involved, but it's already hard enough to get volunteers to do things in town when people are not property or are property owners. And so if we are going to add over 50% or increase the population by over 50% in downtown with all renters, is that advantageous to us? I don't know. So yeah, I can't necessarily say exactly what the character of the town's changes will be. And of all of my concerns, environmental, traffic, and flooding, that's the least of them. And I think traffic, flooding, and environmental impacts are very easy to bring data to. So I'm happy to throw out my concerns about the character of the downtown, because I think the other three concerns are so heavily weighted that, yeah, it's sort of a non-issue.
Okay. And is the flooding issue just relative to the possible additional access road? Is that the concern with the flooding? If they're out of the floodplain?
I mean, phase 2 is phase 2, but we've already permitted them to tear out a swath of woods there that definitely slows the flow of water off of that slope. So we're already going to be adding pressure to the floodway directly behind town center. And there, I think, has already been requests to make sure that they have access to the easement, to the farm access easement back there for building purposes. I don't have the document where that was written off the top of my head, but I know that in my recent going over of those documents, it was there. And so the pressure added to that farm access area will impact that flood hazard way.
Okay. And is there, I mean, Josie, you can probably tell me if there's been stormwater provisions, or Keith, maybe you know this about, are there stormwater or, you know, mitigating methods that are
just to be clear.
Just let me comment on it. I could probably address it. That Katie really unfortunately has no idea what she's talking about in terms of the environmental impacts with stormwater, flood zone, 500-year flood zone, and 100-year flood zone, of all the stuff we had to comply with to get the master plan, to get the blessings from the state. I worked as a wildlife and fisheries biologist for the state, and I know my stuff down in the Oxbow, and I talked with the biologists down there. It's a great sensitive area, but we had to preserve it. It's mapped in the green zone in the master plan. It's clearly shown and dictated, and there's professionals way beyond all of us here that work for the Army Corps of Engineers with flooding. And I don't know what Katie's referring to about adding to flooding, and you're not. Here's the bottom line facts of the situation. You cannot fill in a flood zone, and you can't decrease your amount of impact or increase the amount of impact on a flood zone period in any development, in any Act 250 project in the state. So the project complies top to bottom with everything that the state requires in terms of impact on flooding, on the environmental impacts, on the months and months of studies that we went through with the state. And that was my whole point of getting into development 25 years ago after I was working with the state, because stuff was getting so vehemently butchered by developers. It was like, it would be nice to have somebody try and do it right. And we try and do it right. And we got the thing out of a brownfield, and we were heralded with it. And then the next thing you know, we're crucified by trying to take the property to another level. Katie wasn't around during that time. She moved here 3 years after it all happened, jumped into the, so, and I'm trying to move it forward. We've burned 40 minutes talking about just hearsay and non-factual comments. I just want to move forward with your comments, Virginia, on our proposal, how we can address it, what we can do to either help facilitate it, pivot sideways to address some of your comments or whatever. And Mark's burned up 30 minutes of our time with a bunch of jargon too. I'd rather hear from some of the other members and yourself and Keith to address what we're talking about and keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, well, you know, I think it is important for people to try to define what it is that's problematic about this. You know, so we have a housing crisis. Currently, people have been focused on using our one little piece of land up there at Browns Court to put housing on. Here we have a project that is already a residential construction that is asking if they can put some more residential units there. Why is that not a better choice to help with their housing situation? If you all have read the packet, you will see that the tenants that are in Building 1 are exactly the kind of people that we talk about for workforce. Where are our firefighters going to live? Where are our teachers going to live? You know, there's a risk in not adding more housing. And I think that's something that, you know, all of us who love the villages, our villages just the way they are, we forget that if we don't do anything, the demographics will change completely. The only housing that will be built is expensive housing out in the countryside, big pieces of land that support big houses for people who have plenty of money. That is the demographic that is coming. And the Jericho Planning Commission was very clear on this as well. So it's not like we can keep our village just the way it is and not change it, because change is coming for us, whether we like it or not. What kind of change do we want? Would we like to allow there to be more in our downtown? Can we start thinking of this project as being more like part of the downtown? Why is that an alteration of the character of town? That's something that I can't really wrap my mind around. There will be more people. There will be more people to work at our businesses. There will be more people to support our businesses. They will not have to drive to get there. Why is that not a positive when we're trying to work on this housing problem without using up all our farm and forest land? This is a place where it's an efficient place to develop. We need to think about the traffic, sure. Are there mitigation methods that we can use? Can we have a traffic light at that intersection? Whatever, you know, what mitigations can we use rather than just saying it's a problem? I mean, every time somebody builds something in Huntington, our traffic also increases. We can't do anything about it. We need to think about the overall picture. You know, we need more housing. Let's see if we can't mitigate the traffic problem. Let's start there. In terms of the number of units, in Building 1, we have many smaller units and we can get the exact rents, but Josie says, and we'll believe her, that some of these units rent for 60 to 80% AMI. This is the affordable housing level. It's clearly not feasible to ask them to enter the actual HUD affordable housing structure. Too much paperwork. You've got to be looking at people's income. But it is possible to me that a compromising position would be, for instance, to go back to a November statement that Buttermilk gave us that says, well, you know, maybe we could have some of these new units at 80% AMI, and that's would be a fairly simple thing to do, not being HUD affordable, not requiring any paperwork, just saying that for 5 years, for 10 years, whatever, we're going to keep 3 of these units, 5 of these units at 80% of AMI. This would be very helpful in terms of the affordable housing people in this town who are determined that we need affordable housing. This is affordable housing. It's just not in the affordable housing structure, which is burdensome, and unless you're a nonprofit, and even then it's really hard to do. The town can't really do it. We don't have enough person power to do it. But that would be, for instance, the kind of thing that we could talk about, like traffic mitigation. Let's talk about those things for the benefit of being able to have additional housing and to house the people that we need to house. Now, if some of them were condos, so that's in the home ownership pipeline, maybe that would be a point that we could talk about. I don't know, but we don't seem to be able to get on board with talking about these real things that we could possibly do. And, you know, I don't understand why it's frightening for people to think that there are going to be more people in the downtown area. We need a vital, bustling area. Downtown Richmond, with people moving around all the time, is the envy of many of our neighbors, like Huntington, no town center, Jericho, no town center. They look at Richmond and they go, yeah, look, you know, people are eating on the cafes outside. They're, you know, another point that we can talk about is the 3 acres that are in the floodplain. How could we possibly have some amenities there, like a walking trail or something, you know, not expensive things or things that are going to get washed away in a flood, but how about a little garden area that has been suggested, you know, to give, if this is going to be a neighborhood, let's have some amenities there. You know, can we have a little picnicking area? Or, you know, to me, that would be the kind of thing that would bring benefit to Richmond, as well as the additional housing bringing benefit. But we could also have, you know, some areas of this big, beautiful green space that we're preserving, but maybe it could be a natural amenity for the people who live there, and then, you know, they wouldn't be at Volunteers Court or whatever, Volunteers Green. So I would really like to be able to get beyond just thinking that this is a problem and think how it could be, how the issues, the particular issues, can be mitigated, or what is difficult about them. Or so those are the kinds of things that I would really like us to be able to focus on, and to understand what the real difference is between thinking of 31 more units or 55 units. What is the difference there? Well, it's more people, yes, but why intrinsically is that a bad thing? So I should stop talking. Adam, do you want to have a comment?
Yeah, you actually touched on a bunch of mine. I guess I want to echo your sentiment that you know, all of a sudden adding 125 units would be a big change, but at the same time, doing nothing to our housing, no change is in fact a change. Our demographics will change, and that'll feel different in town just as much as development looks different. And so I think that there is a middle ground there. I think that with the amount of units permitted now, I guess for me to seriously consider any number, you know, any significant number above that, I'd want to seriously discuss, like you had mentioned, Virginia. This is where I saying you kind of touched on them, is that some kind of, you know, not income checking or anything, or verifying people, but a commitment to some portion of the rental units being at an 80% AMI and being adjusted. And I think in my mind, for that realistically to work, it would have to be some number that would be at 80% AMI in perpetuity, or some number of units that we can discuss where they would be condoized to incentivize homeownership in town and strengthen the ties of the people that are moving here to the community. I understand that those are that's a big departure from what I would imagine Brendan and Josie had in mind. So I'm kind of open to discussing how that would work. I don't have anything in particular in mind as far as numbers or structure to put that in place. But I think for me to really get on board with more units and in particular to really stomach the idea of doing something that would be approaching the triple digit number, that we would have to have a serious conversation about that. And there would need to be a large percentage of those units that would be committed to either ownership or rent control long term. I understand the intricacies of actually following through and checking people's income. I don't think that's reasonable, obviously, but I think that we can make we can accomplish 90% of that with the tools we have in place. And I think the traffic, I mean, in my mind, the traffic is a concern. Obviously, I drive through town most days. I don't think it's an unmanageable issue, but I would also like to see some kind of commitment there that we would not be connecting that through road, and the traffic we would have a traffic study and a plan going forward. Because I think, as Katie had pointed out, if we are going to undertake this massive redevelopment, the idea of within the next 5-10 years or whatever having to revamp the town center to mitigate traffic from this development is tough for me to stomach. But I guess those would be my main concerns. Would really be how we ensure that the people of all different means are able to live in this going forward, and I guess even a best case scenario, possibly have some kind of property ownership in it, some portion of it. Obviously, I don't think it's reasonable to ask Buttermilk to sell all the units by any means, but some balance there to kind of diversify the ownership and fee structures, and hopefully the people. So yeah, I guess having said that, I know that's maybe a bit of a dramatic request or a departure. So I don't know if Josie and Brendan, is that 100% a non-starter, or are you open to a discussion about that? I mean, what are your initial thoughts?
Which of those? Can you repeat?
Yeah, so committing some portion of the units to an 80% AMI rent in perpetuity. Obviously the units above and beyond what you have permitted for now, or condoizing and selling some amount of units. I don't have numbers in mind. I just want to, if that's completely a non-starter, then I would like to know that so we don't waste our time with that. Go for it.
Break it down. So I was asked in last spring by Revy, and that's how we started some of these numbers discussion, to say if we wanted 10 to 15 affordable units, and he looked at 80% AMI, and that's how we walked down this. And he said the committee's looking at 10 to 15 AMI. He asked me, what would you need to offer that? And it was not at perpetuity. I'll come back to that one. And so that's why we ran a big cost analysis, and that's how we started getting on these numbers. How many at market do we need to support the loss of income of these things? It's simple economics, right? And that's how we started down this thing. And again, I think I walked that through in those last meetings. In perpetuity, and then he came back a couple months later and asked me, I think this was like early summer, and said, hey, the concept of, but I wasn't sure if there's a planning commission or the housing committee, they're asking whether or not it can be in perpetuity. So I went back to my banks and had a conversation with several of the lenders that we work with. And they said, here's the problem. And then also there was another developer in Southern Vermont that was doing a similar type of thing. And they gave me feedback to say in perpetuity will be a struggle to finance, because it basically means you are Section 8 and it creates a conveyance on the property. I don't pretend to be an expert, but when I talked to the banks, this is what they said. And I was getting feedback from both other developers and at least 2 banks that I had conversation. And the banks were like, if you're interested in this, we are no-go. We can't work with you. Now, that was a year ago.
Just one quick comment was,
Please.
It was real quick, was that it's just what we were all talking about with the MDP. We can't predict the future, and the banks are so right? They're very conservative and they want to know their note's going to get paid, period. And
So
so
what about the limited time period? 5
So
years, 10
that's why I was
years?
coming back.
Is that
Yeah.
So that's where we
something you
came
can work with?
to, again, it was this developer that had done it. I think it was in Brattleboro or Bennington. It was in Southern Vermont. I reached out to them and they had done an affordable housing where they structured it, but they didn't go through a third party. And Revy and I put our heads together and was like, okay. And they said they did it at 80% at 10 years. And that's the way that they would guarantee it at 10 years. Now, that is what they could write the legislation around and the bond and whatever those things around the rules and regulations that they could do. Now, in some of our units, and my hope is that it'll be longer than 10 years, but I cannot burden the debt in that way and the financing in that way based on the information that I know. Now, I reached out to, again, because on top of this, and Virginia touched base on this, based on Revy and I had a conversation last year with Vermont Finance Housing to explore every single different financial structure that we could make this happen. We looked at all the ones that the state offers and federal offers. And the problem is the location of the site, i.e. no public transportation, not high enough density, not enough, all of those other things, plus the fact that we are private ownership and it's too small. I know it seems too big in some of our minds, but it's too small in terms of a volume game. Basically, they said none of these other financial structures that work for bigger developments you trigger. And they said the number one recommendation after that conversation was to change density so that there is a motivator or an economic opportunity for us to recoup those lost costs in the cash flow for the bank. And that was the simple thing. So and that's why
you would consider a limited period of time. So
yes,
I just
10 years. That was what the banks
you're
told me.
saying is
Correct.
possible in answer to Adam's question, is it a no-go? What you're saying is that what you could possibly offer, and since we're not talking about 125 for 15 or 20 units at 80% AMI, we're talking about maybe 70 units, 3 to 5 or something, some number you could offer with a 10-year window.
Yes, and I would, once we got to those
work.
numbers, I would talk to our banks again, right? And ask the questions and go with real numbers to say, this is what I'm looking at. Because again, it's the crystal ball. I don't know. And FYI, AMIs have changed significantly. I just updated all of our numbers and showed that we were pretty off the market. Like, these are things that are constantly being updated. And so I would want to have a real pragmatic conversation once we got to some type of, I mean, we want to progress with development, but also part of that is housing. We have a housing crisis. We live in Vermont. I have lived in Vermont my entire life. I am on affordable housing committees and boards and working on things. I'm committed to this work. So yes, to pointing, in perpetuity was basically a deal breaker according to my banks.
Yeah. But
some
period of time with a simple scheme, which is like, all right, every year you tell the town of Richmond, here are the 5 units that are 80% of AMI, and this is what we're charging for them, and here's what AMI is, and you're good to go. So I don't know if that answers your question anyway, Adam. It says like,
yeah, no, I guess Brendan was just mentioning something about the condo he had mentioned.
Yeah, the condos I just wanted to address quickly was interested in it. It complicates the ownership of the development and potentially, as I'm getting old, like, either passing ownership on, selling to a partner, whatever, that it complicates a few things in terms of the financing and the permitting and how it's structured if it's a mixed use of apartments and condos. We've explored it multiple times. We're definitely not against it because it actually monetizes the expense of building these things, as you know, of all the apartments and the thousands of apartments getting built in Burlington now, the big developers there, Scott Ireland, who I talk often with about asking how he can afford to make it work and it's by turning the top floors into condos and helping monetize the building and hoping to secure some, like you said, committed people that are living there. Hopefully Richmond would stay at that, like that where we live, and in Stowe we're just kind of promoting a lot of more of even second homeowners for some of it. And so I mean, and truly, I mean, if that's how we wanted to make profit, Mark, we just develop it, condo it, sell them all off and maximize a profit and bolt and meet the 45 units, and it would do nothing for like recurring workforce housing or anything. So I don't have an interest in that. So I guess
so what was your
there's no I would not be able to say right now like absolutely on board.
Okay.
We are completely open to it. I'm just trying to figure out the metrics of it and how.
Yeah. So I mean, I
Gotcha.
would echo that. I looked into condominiums for commercial reasons, not for these reasons, and was hitting some significant blockage, and we would like, our intent and interest is different than the economics of it and the pragmaticness of it, and so we can do some investigation of it, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But we can't commit. There was something else that you mentioned. Oh, I just want to say for the record, because I think there's a little confusion going on here, is that the plan that was permitted and approved by the DRB, there's no road through. There's absolutely no road through. So, and just as a reminder, the traffic study that was permitted means that even with full development, full build out, we did not trigger the needs to do any mitigation activity. Now, that's also with our crystal ball, right? This is part of the problem, is the crystal ball of when we ever added on this full density, how's the traffic going from Huntington? How's the traffic going from Jericho, right? So that was the forecast and the analysis that they did in the beginning of this year. But just so everyone's clear, the road through is not part of the plan. And that plan was approved by ANR last year. So the Agency of Natural Resources. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to point out, because we can talk more about this. We are in full agreement to Virginia's comments, I think it was, about putting in these lifestyle stuffs, community gardens, walking paths, all of that stuff. Our first plans all had that. Just so everyone's very clear. Yeah, I think it was in March or April before the latest submission, we still had a community garden in the area of green space and natural resources. ANR had us pull that out. So they required us to remove any of that because it is a protected space. So I just want to let you know, we're in full support, but we are also being crushed on both sides. Like we want to do it, but then we get pulled out. So if there is an interest to do that, so FYI, just side note on that, the farm road access, ANR was asking us to go against our legal agreement and the town's legal agreement to remove access to the farm, to Jericho settlers, because they wanted to revoke our agreements with them to return that land to green space. Just so you know, but that was our lawyer and the town's lawyer found that was legally not possible, but that was what ANR was doing. So I just want to kind of mention, if this is part of a requirement, you have our support, but we will need your guys's legal and town leverage to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great. Thanks for clarifying the traffic in the road, Josie.
Sure. On the one last short thing on the road though, Josie and everybody, it's the whole MDP thing. It's not in there. It's not proposed to be in there. In 15 or 10 years from now, if the town is like, boy, it would be so much nicer to have a road through there, we can guarantee you that we're going to hear like, oh, we got buffaloed again. It's more like we're just reacting to what could be the best thing. Is a one-way loop coming down through? Is transportation going to change? Is the cars going to change? We don't know, but it's not proposed in any facet. and we haven't proposed it. It only came up in many discussions with the town, and it was people on the planning commissions and select boards that we were dealing with way back then. Somebody suggesting a road going through and not putting the traffic back out across from the market and putting it down through the town. We were just like, we could entertain it, but it costs more money. So why would we want to do it?
There was a map that was one of your master plans that included a paved road. It was not just discussion. There was a master plan that included it.
Yeah, it was John Grenier's. It was John Grenier's. It was removed because it was incorrect.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, anybody who's interested in the climate change problem would tell you that what we hope in 15 years is that there will be less traffic. Now, the skeptics in the world would say there's always going to be more traffic. But for those of us who also work in the climate change arena, that's the goal, is to have people driving less and walking more. So, all right, well, luckily we didn't have Chris Granda here tonight, so we didn't have to stop right at 9 o'clock. I'm going to ask Keith if he has anything he wants to say from a planning perspective about this or not.
Yeah, I know Mark's had his hand raised for quite a while now. I'm not sure if he's got something to say, and then I can close things out.
Okay, so Mark, a couple of minutes, because you have had a lot of time to speak. So if you could just summarize in a couple of minutes, that would be great.
I'm sorry, seriously, Virginia, you're telling me I've had a lot of time to speak?
Go ahead.
We've had this conversation going on for the last 3 meetings that have had well over an hour, and in each one of those meetings, hearing you, Brendan, and Josie tell us why we need to have 70 units put in, and that's the only option. Those are the only voices that have been heard.
Go ahead.
I'll go on for one little spiel about my perspective of what I recall of this history of this process, good and bad, acknowledging some of the good things that they have done, but also pointing out some of the things that don't, and my honest, genuine concerns about the impact this would have. And now you're giving me grief. You're listening to your partner Brendan tell you, oh, well, Mark's already gone off for a half an hour out of the last 3.5, 4 hours of nothing but positive. We got to do this. This is going to happen. That is absolutely offensive to me.
My apologies. Carry on. Go ahead.
Accept your apology. That being said, one of the points I was trying to make is that you're talking about some way to move forward. Isn't there a way to move forward with the current density of 45? That's my question to I guess, Josie and Brendan. We agreed on 45. I'm open. I don't know how the community will be, but I'm open to considering reducing the commercial requirements. But I'm not open to, without a lot more information, about jumping up to 70 when we don't even know. 12 units is not 70 units. You're talking about 5 times the number of units going in that place. And doesn't need a traffic study because it doesn't qualify by our zoning. Doesn't need any of these other concerns or questions on an intersection that isn't even squared off, because they built that first building where you could have squared it off with what is it, Railroad Street there, and put in a 1-4-way light, moved the, anyways. My point is, and my question is, can we consider going forward on 45 with reduced commercial? Let's see how it goes. And then phase 3, if there isn't a big impact from 45 units, which if there isn't, at least we'll have facts and a real life experience to know, okay, that wasn't a big impact. Let's see where we can extend that and put in an additional 25 units and maybe throw in some additional commercial in there and revisit this. You know, they'll still always be able to put in more commercial in that phase 3. But without knowing more or seeing more, it's a tough pill to swallow. So that was my question to Josie and Brendan, and I definitely do not appreciate being ganged up on.
Okay, Josie, do you want to respond?
Do you want me to, sure, because I know we're getting late and we're not going to make
Yes.
any decisions.
Yeah,
So
just a couple of minutes and then we'll get Keith. He wants to say something and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you all for being patient and hanging in with it.
So to mark your question, can we move forward with 45 units in building 2? Absolutely. But our ability to do affordable housing will be diminished because the square footage, right? No, I'm just being honest. The square footage costs and the financing costs would be high, and to offset the cost to offer affordable. So I want to go back to what we were asked to do was to look at providing affordable housing. If that's no longer a requirement and we are looking at market workforce housing, that's a doable metric. But I personally don't think that that's the conversation I've heard from the housing study, what I heard from the select board meetings that I've listened to recently. There is a broader need for a broader mix, and that would be my opinion. And that's why we've been encouraging to have a higher volume so we could offset.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So Keith, you want to say something and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm just going to put my planner hat on and just say, basically, as a planner, I deal with what is and what will be, not what was. And to hear the constant sniping back and forth from both of what was is disconcerting from a planner's point of view. It's a waste of time. I don't like to waste time. I want to deal with what is and what will be, not what was. And that's all I have to say about that. And I will send out the traffic studies to the board, to the commission, first thing tomorrow morning. I got my note to myself, and I'll be up here probably for another half hour doing a debrief. And I really, really appreciate the board extending the time past 9. That's typically the way that I operate with commissions, is to go past, the 2 hours allotted, because we have business to do. And I really appreciate that. And I commend you all for that, for what it's worth. But I'm here as a sounding board. I have an opinion, but I have got to run in the middle. I mean, that's what I get paid for. But I do want to reiterate, I really, really, it annoys me, for what it's worth. Again, it annoys me when we bring up the past. The past is immaterial. We have to deal with what is and what will be. So that's the way I operate, and that's the way you can deal with me. And that's just a little insight into how I operate. That's all I got. All right. And again, I really commend going over the time. So thank you.
All right, great. Well, I think we've had a good discussion, and we will be revisiting this, obviously, along with continuing forward with our village neighborhoods rezone effort and our master development plan and the subdivisions, that review, and along with whatever else is coming up. So at some point, we will have to talk about the AR district and how we're going to deal with the open land there. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming, and we will see you next time, which will be on the 17th of January. So, and if you could let Keith know if you're not able to make that meeting, that would be great, so that we can formulate our forum.
Virginia, just so for my planning, are we most likely going to be on that agenda? Just so that I know, or do you have other stuff? You just mentioned a bunch of other tasks.
Right. Well, I guess, I don't know. I can't commit to that right now. What do you think, Keith? Probably.
I think once the minutes come out, I know that I've been looking for direction from the commission on this particular issue, and that direction ultimately will lead to starting to promulgate language. I'm not there yet because you're not there yet. And just keep up the good work. That's all I got to say. But I would like to have it on as a discussion. Yes, I would like to keep it going, keep that ball rolling. Rolling stone gathers no moss.
Yeah. So Yeah, I
Okay,
guess that's
thanks.
all we can say with the crystal ball, you know?
That's all right. I think if we could invent that, we would be very rich.
That
So,
would be a good thing. All
all
right,
right, thank you.
great. Thank you all for coming.
Well, have a
and
great evening.
What's
we'll
up? Thank you.
Virginia.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes, a motion to adjourn Mark is making. That's good.
Got a second?
And is there a second? Seconded by Adam. Are there any objections by planning commissioners to adjourn this meeting? I'm not hearing any. Do we still have a quorum? One,
We
two,
do.
three. Yes, we still have a quorum. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Great.
Right.
Thanks so much. Yeah.